Hi everyone, so my name is Natalie Nichols. I'm going to walk you through my lesson for one of the NGSS standards. The standard is 2-LS4-1, which says students can make observations of plants and animals to compare the diversity of life in different habitats. So I just have a very basic kind of introduction lesson just to get kids introduced and familiar with the idea of diversity, what diversity is, what it looks like. So our learning goals for today are going to be students will be able to analyze plants and animals to further understand diversity of a habitat. And also students will be able to take observations and infer and compare different living things and their habitats. So I put together a PowerPoint that I'm going to share with the class. Let me get this going. All right. And so our learning activity, it's going to be, we're going to get really into it later, but overall, the learning activity is very just discussion, good discussion based. So we'll get into some like partner discussion, as well as working with post-it notes and posting our own ideas. So kids get communication and I can individually see their work. So I have here, if you can see on the screen, that there are 4 different pictures here. Does anyone know what the names, or can you describe what habitats you see here? So I would look for answers. Maybe they would point out, I would ask like, what differences do you see? Do you see different animals in each one? Do you see different plants in each one? This would just be individual response. And then I would start in, there's diversity in every type of habitat we see. Does anyone know what diversity means? And then I want to give them a chance to turn to either partner up or find a group of 3. And if they do know, fill their group in with what they think diversity means. If they don't know, just try and think about it the way I kind of already referred to different plants and animals. Then I would call them back together and say, okay, so then let's look at what diversity means. Oh, my little bulb is in the way. I was saying, diversity means that there's a variety or many different types of something. So basically, every habitat, like we looked at in these 4, every habitat has diversity or a variety of different plants and animals. So we see here, I'd reference back to our first slide, we see there's a rhino, there's giraffes, the sun's hot, but then we go down to here and it looks cooler. We've got a lot more trees, we've got like bears. So again, I would just reference every habitat has diversity. There are many different living things in different places. So now I would show an example with just a few animals, few plants, and just give them a chance to kind of observe and let's look for diversity in the forest. And so I would go one by one with my 4 different living things here. I would ask a student, what's one of the things you see in our forest? Let's say they say white-tailed deer. I'll say, okay, awesome. What do you guys know about deer? And I would wait for some discussion. If they weren't getting aware with it, I would say, does anyone know what deer eat? Get them to reference the connection with the deer and the grass. I would also say, also like deer feces adds to the soil to help it grow. So not only are the deer taking from the grass, but they're also giving back to the grass and other plants in the forest. And then we get around talking about lots of grass. I would ask them what the benefits are of lots of grass in the forest, the connection to blue jays and trees, why birds, blue jays specifically, are important to the forest. You know, like birds will scatter pollen to the trees and the lower plants. They control the bug population in the forest. So I would kind of try to do 50-50 discussion and questions with this slide. And then bringing in the higher order thinking question for this activity, our next slide, I would say, reference there's a lot of diversity in this forest, right? We have animals that can fly, animals that walk on the land. But what if we got rid of diversity? If we got rid of diversity in our plants in the forest? So a question that I want you to talk to a partner about is, what would happen if grass was the only plant in the forest? So I would give them a lot of time to just discuss with the partner. This is also when I would bring out post-it notes for students to either write down. You can write down your answer, you can draw out your answer, but I also included some prompts if you get stuck. So we have, if there was only grass, there's no trees in this forest, what would that do to the birds? If there were no trees. That would also include this idea of what would that do to other plants and animals if there were no trees in the forest? So this would be our big learning activity, where you would discuss with the partner for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'm going to have the students write down or draw what the forest would look like with just grass, no trees, no bushes. And then I would use those post-its later as kind of informal assessment, just to see if they're kind of understanding the impact of diversity, or lack of diversity in this case. And then after this, if there was time, I would just use this to kind of emphasize that diversity is important. Take some of the post-its and kind of share their answers with the class. And then if there was time, I would get into, what about diversity in the Arctic? So I just have a few animals, I have the polar bear and the Arctic grayling. And so I would kind of say, so the same thing I did with the forest, what animals do we see here? And then, just get them to see that it's good to have polar bears and other animals that eat meat, along with having the meat that is supplied to these animals. I also kind of want to see if they notice that there's no real plants in the Arctic. I'd be interested to see if they notice that, and that there's not really much diversity in plants in the Arctic. And then that's where I would like to end the lesson. If there was more time, I would try and get them to compare the sea diversity across habitats. That's a little more tricky, but seeing why do deer live in the forest, why do polar bears live in the Arctic and not in the forest, kind of stuff. And then for my true informal assessment, along with observing their discussions and post-its throughout the lesson, I would also have, I like exit tickets. I think it's a great way to just sum up the lesson and emphasize that diversity is what I'm going for. And so I would ask them, in your own words, what does diversity mean? And then I would, again, give them some kind of slip of paper, index card or something, and either let them draw it or write it out. So they get some choice in that. That's my lesson and activity. Not too much hands-on, just mostly observation, discussion, and inferring. Yeah, thank you so much for watching,